Wyoming Territory, 1875. The jagged peaks of the Grand Tetons pierced the evening sky like nature's watchtowers, standing sentinel over the untamed wilderness below. A lone figure on horseback navigated the rocky trail, his broad shoulders tense against the approaching storm. Vaughn Quinn had long ago accepted that some men were born for solitude, especially men who'd seen what he had on these merciless frontier lands. At 26, Vaughn was already considered a veteran of the mountains. His handsome face, high cheekbones, and piercing blue eyes that matched the Wyoming sky belied the hardness he carried within. The light stubble on his jaw couldn't hide the scar that ran from his right ear to his chin, a permanent reminder that the West demanded blood for its secrets. Despite his youth, the local townsfolk spoke his name with a mixture of respect and unease. They said Vaughn Quinn could track a wolf through a blizzard, break the wildest bronco, and shoot the flame off a candle at 50 paces, but no one had ever seen him smile. "Come on, Thunder," he murmured to his black stallion as the first raindrops fell. Pinedale's just beyond that ridge. The storm chased him into town, unleashing its fury just as he reached the hitching post outside the Antler Saloon. Inside, piano music battled with drunken laughter and the clinking of glasses. Vaughn shook the rain from his hat before entering, his spurs announcing his arrival with soft metallic chimes. "Quinn," the barkeep nodded. "Usual?" Vaughn nodded back, claiming a corner table where his back pressed against the wall, a habit born from necessity rather than paranoia. A man didn't survive 5 years in these mountains by being careless. The mountains don't forgive mistakes, his father had told him before a Blackfoot arrow found his heart. And they don't comfort the lonely. Vaughn had taken both lessons to heart, building his life around a simple truth. The frontier was no place for tenderness. Love made men weak, and weakness got men killed. He sipped his whiskey, listening to the conversations around him, cattle prices dropping, rumors of gold in the hills, and trouble with rustlers to the north. Information was currency out here, sometimes more valuable than the coins weighing down his pocket from the horses he'd sold that morning. "You ever consider settling down, Quinn?" The question came from Sheriff Davis, who'd appeared at his table with his own glass of whiskey. "No room for a woman in my life," Vaughn answered flatly. "I'm too rough for that kind of living. The mountains are all the company I need." The sheriff chuckled. "Every wild horse thinks that way until the right hand gentles him." Vaughn's expression hardened. "I'm not a horse to be broken." "No one said anything about breaking," Davis countered, finishing his drink. "Sometimes it's about finding something worth changing for." Vaughn offered no response, and the sheriff moved on, leaving him alone with thoughts he'd rather not examine. Tomorrow he'd head back to his cabin high in the hills, away from people and their uncomfortable questions. His life was exactly as it should be, solitary, predictable, safe from the complications that feelings brought. The saloon doors swung open, momentarily silencing the piano player. A gust of rain-scented wind swept in, along with the most striking woman Vaughn had ever seen. She stood in the doorway, her sage-green traveling dress sodden at the hem, golden hair escaping from what must have once been an elegant chignon. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but it was her eyes that caught him, amber-brown and fiercely determined, scanning the room as if taking inventory. "I'm looking for Sheriff Davis," she announced, her voice cultured but firm. "I was told he might help me locate my uncle's property." The saloon patron stared, unused to a lady of obvious refinement entering their domain. The sheriff stepped forward. "Miss, perhaps we should discuss this at my office. I've spent 6 hours in a stagecoach that overturned 2 miles outside town," she said evenly. "I walked through mud and rain after the driver insisted on continuing with the mail rather than escorting me. I would prefer not to walk anywhere else tonight." Her forthright speech brought a smile to the sheriff's face. "Fair enough. I'm Davis." He gestured to a chair at an empty table, keeping a respectful distance. Vaughn found himself watching her, the graceful way she removed her gloves, the confident tilt of her chin. She was out of place here, like a rose blooming in rocky soil. Whatever had brought her to Pinedale would surely take her away again just as quickly. He drained his glass, determined to leave before curiosity got the better of him. Fate had other plans. A crash of thunder shook the building, and seconds later the saloon doors burst open again. 3 men stormed in, rain dripping from their slickers and hate burning in their eyes. Vaughn recognized them immediately, The Hanson brothers, notorious troublemakers who'd been circling the territory like vultures. "Where's the money, Davis?" the eldest demanded, his hand hovering near his holster. The sheriff stood slowly. "Whatever business you think you have with me can wait until morning when you're sober. Our business is now," the second brother snarled, drawing his pistol. What happened next occurred in a heartbeat. The third brother grabbed the golden-haired woman, pressing a knife to her throat. "Insurance," he growled, "so nobody gets heroic." Something hot and fierce ignited in Vaughn's chest. Before he had time to consider the wisdom of his actions, he was on his feet, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let her go, Hanson." All eyes turned to him. The woman's gaze found his, and in that moment of connection, Vaughn felt something shift inside him, like the first warning rumble before an avalanche. "Quinn," the eldest brother sneered, "this ain't your fight." "It is now." Vaughn's hand hovered near his holster, his stance casual but ready. "The lady didn't come to Pinedale to die. Let her go. Take your grievances elsewhere, and we can all see tomorrow." "You willing to die for a woman you don't even know?" the knife wielder taunted. The question hung in the air. Vaughn had spent years avoiding entanglements, keeping to himself, surviving precisely because he didn't get involved. Yet here he stood, risking everything for a stranger with golden hair and determined eyes. "I'm willing to kill for decent manners," Vaughn replied, his voice deceptively soft. "Something your mama clearly failed to teach you." The woman, despite the blade at her throat, maintained a composure that impressed him. Her eyes never left his, and he read a message there. She wasn't paralyzed by fear, but waiting for an opportunity. He gave her the slightest nod. What followed would become saloon legend in Pinedale. As Vaughn drew and fired at the eldest brother's shoulder, the woman drove her elbow hard into her captor's ribs. The knife wavered just enough for her to duck away as Vaughn's second shot sent the weapon clattering across the floor. Sheriff Davis tackled the middle brother, and within moments, all three Hansons were disarmed and subdued. "Are you hurt?" Vaughn found himself asking the woman, surprised by the concern in his own voice. She touched her neck where the blade had been. "No, thanks to you." Her voice trembled slightly, the only indication of her fear. "Winifred Lawrence." "I'd offer my hand, but they seem to be shaking." "Vaughn Quinn." He gently took her trembling hand anyway. "Welcome to Pinedale, Miss Lawrence. Not our usual reception for visitors." A smile touched her lips, transforming her face from merely beautiful to breathtaking. "I should hope not, Mr. Quinn." Sheriff Davis approached after securing the Hansons. "Miss Lawrence, I insist you take a room at Mrs. Porter's boarding house tonight. It's the safest place in town." "I'd be grateful," she said, composure fully restored. "Quinn," the sheriff added, "would you escort Miss Lawrence? I've got my hands full here." Vaughn wanted to refuse. Getting involved further with this woman meant stepping off the solitary path he'd carved for himself. Yet he found himself nodding, retrieving her travel bag, and offering his arm. Outside, the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle. Stars peeked through breaks in the clouds as they walked the muddy street toward the boarding house. "What brings you to Pinedale?" Vaughn asked, breaking the silence. "My uncle passed away last month," she explained. "He left me his property here, a ranch called Whispering Pines. I've come to see it, perhaps sell it." "Joshua Lawrence was your uncle?" Vaughn couldn't hide his surprise. "His place borders my land to the north." Her eyes widened. "Then you knew him?" "Only in passing." He hesitated. "His ranch has been abandoned for months. It'll need work." "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Quinn." Something in her tone made him believe her. "Most Easterners find our version of work differs from theirs." "How do you know I'm from the East?" she challenged. "Your boots," he nodded downward. "Too fine for these parts." "Boston, I'd guess." A smile played at her lips. "Philadelphia, actually. I was a schoolteacher there." "A schoolteacher," he repeated, unable to imagine this golden-haired woman with her courage and composure confined to a classroom. "And now you own 600 acres of Wyoming wilderness." They reached the boarding house steps, and Winifred turned to face him. At 21, her face still held youthful softness, but her eyes revealed a wisdom beyond her years. "Mr. Quinn, would you be willing to show me the property tomorrow? I'd pay for your time, of course." Every instinct warned him to decline. Getting involved with Winifred Lawrence meant complications, and complications got men killed out here. Yet he heard himself say, "I'll be here at sunrise." Her smile was like the first light breaking over the mountains. Until tomorrow, then. As Vaughn walked back to the saloon to retrieve his horse, he tried to understand his own actions. He'd risked his life for this woman, agreed to help her further, behaviors entirely contrary to his survival philosophy. Perhaps it was simply neighborly obligation. Perhaps it was the whiskey. Perhaps it was something far more dangerous. True to his word, Vaughn arrived at the boarding house as the first golden light of dawn painted the mountain peaks. He found Winifred already waiting on the porch, dressed in a practical riding outfit that surprised him. Split skirts suitable for straddling a horse, a fitted jacket, and sturdy boots that had replaced yesterday's fashionable ones. "You came prepared," he observed, handing her the reins to a gentle mare he'd borrowed from the livery. "I did my research before leaving Philadelphia," she replied, mounting with unexpected ease. Though books can only teach so much. They rode north out of town, the morning mist rising from the valleys below. Winifred kept pace with him easily, asking intelligent questions about the land, the weather patterns, the nearby ranches. By midday, when they crested the final hill revealing Whispering Pines Ranch below, Vaughn had developed a reluctant respect for the schoolteacher's determination. The ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, backed by pine forests and sheltered by rising hills. A stream cut through the property, and meadows stretched toward distant mountains. The buildings, however, told a sadder story. A once proud main house with a sagging porch, a listing barn, and corrals with broken fencing. "It's beautiful," Winifred breathed, taking in the view. "It's half collapsed," Vaughn corrected. "I see beyond what is to what could be," she replied. Her eyes swept across the property with such hope that Vaughn found himself following her gaze, trying to see through her eyes. They spent hours exploring the property, Winifred taking notes in a small journal. She examined everything: the creek's water flow, the soil quality, the structure of the house. "The foundation is solid," she remarked inside the dusty main house. "And the roof only needs partial replacing." She ran her fingers along a hand-hewn beam. "My uncle built this himself, didn't he?" "With his own 2 hands," Vaughn confirmed. "Joshua was stubborn that way." "A family trait," she said with a small smile. As the sun began its western descent, they sat on the repaired portion of the porch, sharing jerky and hardtack from Vaughn's saddlebags. "I'm keeping it," Winifred announced suddenly. Vaughn nearly choked on his water. "Beg your pardon?" "The ranch. I'm keeping it, not selling." Her eyes held the same determination he'd witnessed in the saloon. "This land has been in my family for 20 years. I won't be the one to let it go." "Miss Lawrence, Winifred, do you have any idea what running a ranch entails? The work, the danger, the isolation?" "No," she admitted candidly. "But I can learn. People do, don't they? People who grew up out here, who understand what the West demands." "And what does it demand, Mr. Quinn?" "Everything," he said flatly. "It takes everything you have and asks for more. It's not kind to dreamers." "Perhaps the West needs more dreamers," she countered. "Besides, I'm not as delicate as you seem to think." Vaughn shook his head, frustration building. "This isn't about delicacy. It's about survival. Winter here freezes cattle solid. Summer brings drought. Spring brings floods. And that's before counting outlaws, wolves, and a dozen other ways to die." "Then I'll need help," she said simply. The request hung between them, unspoken but clear. Vaughn stood abruptly. "We should head back before dark." They rode in silence for several miles before Winifred spoke again. "You think I'll fail?" It wasn't a question, but Vaughn answered anyway. "I think you don't understand what you're facing." "Then help me understand," she challenged. "Show me." Something in her voice, its honesty, perhaps, made him pull his horse to a stop. Thunder snorted impatiently as Vaughn turned to face her. "Why? Why risk everything on land you've never seen before yesterday?" Winifred's expression softened. "Because in Philadelphia, I was living half a life. Teaching other people's children about adventures I'd never have, places I'd never see. When I received the letter about Uncle Joshua's bequest, something awoke in me." She gestured to the landscape around them. "This is real. Difficult, yes, but real in a way my life there never was." Her words struck an unexpected chord. Hadn't he sought the same authenticity in his own escape to the mountains? "I'll help you get started," he found himself saying. "Find reliable hands. Repair the essential structures. After that, you're on your own." The radiance of her smile nearly buckled his resolve. Thank you, Vaughn. I won't forget this. As they continued toward town, Vaughn silently cursed his own weakness. Helping Winifred Lawrence meant weeks of distraction from his own affairs. Worse, it meant caring about what happened to her, a dangerous proposition in a land where attachment often ended in grief. The frontier is no place for the soft-hearted, his father had warned. Yet as he glanced at the golden-haired woman riding beside him, her chin lifted toward the future, Vaughn Quinn wondered if his father had been wrong about more than just that. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Vaughn helped Winifred hire 2 experienced ranch hands, brothers Miguel and Tomas Reyes, and a cook named Hannah Miller, a widow with weathered hands and a no-nonsense attitude. Together they repaired the barn roof, rebuilt the corral fencing, and made the main house habitable. Winifred worked alongside them from dawn until dusk, learning everything from repairing fence posts to identifying which wild plants were edible. Her hands grew calloused, her fair skin tanned, but her determination never wavered. Even when she fell from a ladder while helping to re-shingle the roof, she merely dusted herself off and climbed back up. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met," Vaughn told her one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Quinn?" she asked, eyes twinkling. "Out here it is." She laughed, a sound that had become dangerously pleasant to his ears. "Then I'll take it as such." Against his better judgment, Vaughn found himself lingering at Whispering Pines long after he'd completed the tasks he'd promised. He told himself it was neighborly concern, nothing more. Yet each morning, he found another reason to ride over. A fence that needed checking, advice about cattle breeds, warnings about a mountain lion spotted nearby. The truth, which he refused to acknowledge even to himself, was that Winifred Lawrence had awakened something within him, something he'd thought long dead. Her courage in facing each new challenge, her wonder at the beauty around them, her quiet strength, all served as reminders of what it meant to truly live, not merely survive. "You've been neglecting your own place," she observed one afternoon as they rode the property boundaries together. "Surely your ranch needs attention too." "My cabin's still standing," he shrugged. "The mountains don't care if I'm gone a while." "And is there no one else who cares?" she asked carefully. "No family waiting?" Vaughn's expression shuddered. "No, no one's waiting." She studied him with those perceptive amber eyes. "The mountains made you a solitary man, didn't they?" "I was born solitary," he corrected. "The mountains just suited me." "I don't believe that," Winifred said quietly. "No one is born preferring loneliness." Her words struck uncomfortably close to truths he'd buried long ago. Sometimes loneliness is safer than the alternative. "And what's the alternative?" "Loss," he said simply. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Who did you lose, Vaughn?" For a moment, he considered deflection or silence, his usual responses to personal questions. Yet something in Winifred's gentle gaze made the walls he'd built around his past seem suddenly permeable. "My father when I was 16. Blackfoot raid. My mother the winter after from pneumonia. My younger sister 2 years later to cholera." The words emerged flat, rehearsed from too many private recitations. "I'm so sorry," Winifred said, reaching across to touch his arm. "It was a long time ago. Not so long. And grief doesn't measure itself in years." Her insight unsettled him. "We should head back. Rain's coming." That night, as predicted, a summer storm lashed the valley. Vaughn sat in the ranch house kitchen with the others, listening to the rain drum against the new roof. Hannah had prepared a hearty stew, and Miguel was recounting a tall tale about a cattle drive gone wrong, his hands gesturing animatedly. Winifred sat across from Vaughn, the lamplight catching golden highlights in her hair. When she laughed at Miguel's story, Vaughn found himself studying the way happiness transformed her face, softening the determination into something sweeter. Dangerous thoughts, dangerous feelings. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, meeting his eyes across the table. Something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Vaughn looked away first, unnerved by the connection. "I should go," he said abruptly, standing. "The creek rises fast during storms. Better cross it now." "Surely you're not riding in this downpour," Hannah protested. "I've ridden through worse." "That's foolishness talking," the older woman scolded. "There's room in the bunkhouse." Before Vaughn could argue, lightning cracked overhead, followed immediately by thunder that shook the windows. Even he had to admit that riding out in such conditions was reckless. Fine, he conceded. Until the storm passes. Later, unable to sleep despite the comfortable bunk, Vaughn stepped onto the covered portion of the porch to watch the storm. The rain fell in silver sheets, illuminated occasionally by flashes of lightning that revealed the landscape in stark relief. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" Winifred's voice came from behind him. He turned to find her wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. The sight of it flowing freely, golden waves cascading past her waist, caught him off guard. It was the first time he'd seen her with her hair down, and the intimacy of it made his mouth go dry. "You should be asleep," he managed. "I've always loved storms," she said, coming to stand beside him. "They remind us of what's beyond our control." She looked up at him. "Why were you really going to leave tonight, Vaughn?" The directness of her question left no room for evasion. "Because I'm staying too often, getting too involved. That wasn't our agreement." "Agreements change." Her eyes held his. "People change." "Not me," he said firmly. "I know what I am, Winifred. I'm not meant for this." He gestured vaguely between them. "I'm too rough for that kind of life. The mountains, solitude, that's what I understand. Is it what you want?" The question hung between them, more dangerous than any storm. Vaughn turned away, gripping the porch railing. "What I want doesn't matter. I know what I am." "And what is that?" she pressed, stepping closer. "A man who brings death to those he stopped himself. To those around him. You think you're cursed?" There was no mockery in her tone, only genuine inquiry. "I think the frontier takes what it wants," he corrected. "And I learned long ago not to fight it by caring too much. Yet here you are," Winifred observed softly. "Helping me, caring whether I succeed or fail." Her perception unsettled him. "That's different." "Is it?" Lightning flashed, illuminating her face. Those determined eyes now soft with something that terrified him more than any storm. Before he could respond, a tremendous crash sounded from the direction of the creek, followed by panicked whinnying. The horses! Vaughn was instantly alert, peering through the rain. Another flash revealed the horror. The creek had overflowed its banks and was rushing toward the corral where their horses were kept. Already the water swirled around the posts. Without hesitation, Vaughn leapt from the porch into the downpour, Winifred right behind him. They splashed through growing puddles toward the frightened animals. Miguel and Tomas, awakened by the noise, emerged from the bunkhouse to help. "The gate!" Vaughn shouted over the storm. "We need to move them to higher ground." The next minutes were chaos, fighting through rushing water, calming terrified horses, leading them to safety on the hillside behind the house. Winifred worked alongside the men, her skirts sodden and heavy, her loose hair plastered to her face by rain. As the last horse was secured, Vaughn turned to find her still at the corral, struggling with a jammed gate as water rose around her knees. "Winifred," he called. "Leave it." She shook her head stubbornly, still fighting with the wooden structure. Vaughn cursed and waded back toward her. The water was rising with alarming speed, the current growing stronger with each passing second. "The flash flood will take the whole corral," he said, reaching her side. "It's not worth your life. If we don't secure it, everything will wash downstream," she argued, still struggling with the gate. As if to punctuate her point, a section of fencing tore away, carried by the current. The sudden shift caused the gate to give way unexpectedly. Winifred lost her footing, falling backward into the surging water. Vaughn lunged for her, catching her arm before the current could sweep her away. He pulled her against his chest, anchoring them both against the gate post as water surged around them. "Hold on to me," he ordered. Together they fought their way through the flood toward higher ground, each step a battle against the current. When they finally reached safety, both collapsed onto the sodden earth, gasping for breath. Rain still pelted them, but Vaughn was aware only of Winifred in his arms, alive and whole. Without thinking, he brushed wet hair from her face, his hand lingering against her cheek. "Don't ever do that again," he said hoarsely. "A fence can be rebuilt. You can't." In the darkness, illuminated only by distant lightning, her eyes met his. "You came back for me. Always," he answered before he could stop himself. The admission hung between them, too honest to retract. Winifred's hand came up to cover his where it still rested against her cheek. "Always," she repeated softly, the word both question and answer. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Miguel's voice broke through the storm, calling their names, and the spell was broken. Vaughn helped her to her feet, maintaining a proper distance as they rejoined the others. But something fundamental had shifted between them, a truth exposed that could not be reburied. That night, lying sleepless in the bunkhouse, Vaughn confronted what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He cared for Winifred Lawrence, deeply, dangerously, and in caring for her, he'd opened himself to the very pain he'd spent years building defenses against. The frontier takes what it wants, his father had said. Vaughn had always interpreted this as warning against attachment. Now he wondered if he'd misunderstood. Perhaps the frontier's greatest demand wasn't that a man stand alone, but that he find the courage to stand beside another despite knowing what could be lost. The storm marked a turning point. Though neither Vaughn nor Winifred spoke of what had passed between them, a new awareness colored their interactions, a careful dance of proximity and distance, of words spoken and unspoken. June turned to July, and Whispering Pines Ranch blossomed under Winifred's determined care. With Vaughn's guidance, she purchased a small herd of cattle and expanded the vegetable garden. The buildings stood repaired, the fences secure. By any measure, she had succeeded where many thought she would fail, which meant Vaughn no longer had reason to remain. "You've fulfilled your promise," Winifred said one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day's work. "The ranch is established. I have good help. You should return to your own land." Though her words were practical, something in her tone suggested she was testing him, waiting to see if he would seize the opportunity to retreat to his solitude. "Are you dismissing me, Miss Lawrence?" he asked, the formality a shield against what he truly wanted to ask. "Never," she answered simply. "But I won't keep you from your own life either. And if I said my life has changed direction?" The question hung between them. Winifred set down her teacup, turning to face him fully. "Has it?" Before Vaughn could answer, hoofbeats sounded on the approach to the ranch. His hand instinctively moved to his holster as he stood. Sheriff Davis appeared in the yard, his expression grim. "Quinn," he called, dismounting. "Got trouble heading this way." "What kind of trouble?" Vaughn stepped off the porch, Winifred close behind. "The Hanson brothers broke out of territorial prison 3 days ago. Word is they're coming back this way, looking for revenge." Vaughn's blood ran cold. "Revenge? On you?" Davis confirmed. "And her." He nodded toward Winifred. "For the shootout in town. They swore they'd make you both pay." Winifred's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "When?" "Soon. They were spotted crossing the pass yesterday." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Quinn, you know I'd stay if I could, but I've got to warn the Layton place and the others." "Go," Vaughn nodded. "We'll be ready here." After Davis departed, Vaughn turned to find Winifred already moving with purpose toward the house. "What are you doing?" "Getting my rifle," she answered without breaking stride. "Then we need to warn Miguel and Tomas. Hannah should go to town until this is over." Her calm efficiency surprised him. "Winifred, you should go with Hannah. The Hansons are coming for me, not the ranch." She stopped, turning back to him with fire in her eyes. "They're coming for both of us, and this is my home. I won't be driven from it by men like them. This isn't a schoolroom disagreement. These men kill without hesitation. All the more reason why you shouldn't face them alone." Her expression softened. "Vaughn, when will you accept that you don't have to stand alone anymore?" The question struck him silent. In all his years in the mountains, he'd never had someone stand beside him against danger, had never allowed it. The possibility both terrified and moved him. The next hours passed in grim preparation. Hannah departed for town with strict instructions to send help if possible. Miguel and Tomas, loyal to their employer, refused to leave despite Winifred's insistence that they could go. "It is a matter of honor, Senora," Miguel said simply. "We stay." By nightfall, the ranch was as secure as they could make it. Rifles loaded, positions established, escape routes planned. All that remained was the waiting. In the quiet darkness of the main house, Vaughn found Winifred standing by the window, gazing out at the starlit valley. "You should rest," he told her. "I'll take first watch." She turned, the moonlight silvering her golden hair. "I keep thinking about what you said that first day, that the West demands everything." "It does," he confirmed. "But it gives an equal measure, doesn't it?" Her eyes held his. "The harshness teaches us our own strength. The danger shows us what matters. The isolation." She hesitated. "The isolation makes us recognize connection when we find it." Something expanded in Vaughn's chest. Hope, perhaps, or courage. He stepped closer. Winifred, if the Hansons come, when they come, she corrected. When they come, he acknowledged. I need you to promise me something. If the fight turns against us, you'll run. You'll save yourself. She shook her head. I won't promise that. Please. He took her hands in his, surprised by his own desperation. I can face whatever comes if I know you're safe. I've lost everyone He stopped, then forced himself to continue. Everyone I cared for. I can't lose you too. Then don't, she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. Fight not just for survival, but for something more. Fight for us, Vaughn. Us. The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Vaughn gazed down at this remarkable woman, no longer the Eastern schoolteacher, but a frontier woman of courage and determination, and felt the last of his resistance crumble. I'm not the man you deserve, he said roughly. I'm too damaged, too rough. You're exactly the man I choose, she interrupted, reaching up to touch his face. With all your roughness and all your scars. The tenderness in her touch undid him. Vaughn drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of all he could not yet say. His fear, his hope, his dawning belief that perhaps the frontier didn't demand solitude after all. When they parted, Winifred's eyes shone with certainty. Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together. For the first time in years, Vaughn Quinn believed in possibility. Dawn broke clear and cold over Whispering Pines Ranch. Dew silvered the grass as Vaughn completed his circuit of the property, rifle in hand. No sign yet of the Hansons, but the day was young. He found Winifred in the kitchen with Hannah, who had returned at first light with news. Sheriffs gathered a posse. The older woman reported. They're searching the North Pass, but it'll be hours before they make it here. Hours we may not have, Vaughn observed grimly. Hannah, you should go back to town. And leave Miss Winifred? Not likely. The cook's weathered face set in stubborn lines. I may be old, but I can still shoot straight. Before Vaughn could argue further, Miguel burst through the door. Riders coming. From the East Ridge. Vaughn's heart hammered as he moved to the window. In the distance, 5 horsemen descended the slope, more than the 3 they'd expected. They've gathered reinforcements, he said, turning to Winifred. This changes things. Her face was pale but determined. What do we do? You, he said firmly. Take Hannah and go out the back way. Head for the old mining shack in the upper meadow. Stay there until— No, she interrupted. I told you last night. We face this together. Winifred, please. His voice broke on her name. I can't fight them knowing you're in danger. And I can't live with myself if I run while you face death. Her eyes met his, unwavering. Would you abandon me if our positions were reversed? The question struck him silent. Of course he wouldn't, couldn't, leave her to face danger alone. How could he ask of her what he himself would find impossible? No, he admitted. I wouldn't leave you. Then don't ask me to leave you. She stepped closer, taking his hand. Whatever happens, we face it as equals. Partners. Partners. The word resonated within him, stronger than fear, more enduring than doubt. Together, then, he conceded, squeezing her hand. But you stay inside with Hannah, Miguel, Tomas, and I will meet them in the yard. The riders were close now, dust rising behind their horses. Vaughn recognized the Hanson brothers in the lead, their faces twisted with hatred even at this distance. The 2 men with them were strangers, rough-looking hired guns from their appearance. Vaughn positioned himself on the porch, Miguel and Tomas flanking him from behind the water trough and woodpile. Inside, he knew Winifred and Hannah waited with loaded rifles, ready to fire through the windows if necessary. The riders halted at the edge of the yard, spreading out in a threatening line. Quinn, the eldest Hanson called. You cost us 6 months in territorial prison. You earned every day of it, Vaughn replied evenly. Turn around, Hanson. The sheriff's on his way with a posse. Plenty of time to kill you first, Hanson sneered. And that interfering woman. Where is she? Hiding. The lady of this ranch doesn't hide from the likes of you, Vaughn answered, his finger resting near the trigger of his rifle. But this doesn't concern her. Your quarrels with me. Our quarrels with anyone who crosses us, the youngest Hanson spat. And we aim to teach a lesson about that today. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Vaughn calculated their chances, 3 defenders against 5 attackers. Not good odds, but they had the advantage of position. Last chance to ride away. Vaughn offered, knowing they wouldn't take it but compelled to try one final time to avoid bloodshed. Hanson's answer was to draw his pistol. The yard erupted in gunfire. Vaughn dove behind a post as bullets splintered the wood around him. Miguel and Tomas returned fire, forcing two of the attackers to take cover behind their fallen horses. Through the chaos, Vaughn kept track of the Hansons. The youngest had circled toward the barn, while the middle brother was pinned down by Tomas's accurate shooting. The eldest and one hired gun were advancing on the house itself. Cold fear gripped Vaughn's heart. Winifred was their target, and they were getting too close. He broke cover, firing as he ran toward the side of the house. A bullet grazed his arm, burning like fire, but he barely felt it through the surge of protective rage. He rounded the corner in time to see the eldest Hanson kicking in the back door. Without hesitation, Vaughn fired, the shot catching Hanson in the shoulder and spinning him around. The wounded man snarled, raising his own weapon. Before he could fire, another shot rang out from inside the house. Hanson staggered, clutching his chest, then fell. Winifred stood in the doorway, rifle still raised, her face pale but resolute. "Get inside," Vaughn urged, moving toward her. A shout from the barn drew their attention. The youngest Hanson had Miguel in his sights, the Reyes brother caught in the open with an empty rifle. Without thinking, Vaughn shoved Winifred back through the doorway and sprinted toward Miguel, firing as he ran. His shot went wide, but it distracted Hanson long enough for Miguel to dive behind a water barrel. Hanson turned his fury on Vaughn, bullets kicking up dirt at his feet. Vaughn dove behind the woodpile, scrambling for better cover as Hanson advanced, firing methodically. "You should have minded your own business, Quinn," Hanson called. "Now you'll die knowing you failed to protect her too." The taunt struck deeper than any bullet. As Hanson moved closer, Vaughn prepared for a final, desperate shot, his last round against Hanson's approaching figure. The impact of a bullet striking wood beside his head forced him to duck. When he looked up again, Hanson had vanished from view. A moment of confusion gave way to horror as Vaughn realized the gunman had changed direction, heading for the back of the house again. Toward Winifred, Vaughn surged to his feet, racing around the building. He rounded the corner in time to see Hanson at the back door, Winifred visible just inside, trying to reload her rifle with shaking hands. "Winifred," he shouted in warning. She looked up, eyes widening in terror as Hanson raised his pistol. Time seemed to slow as Vaughn hurled himself forward, knowing he was too far away, knowing he would be too late. A shot rang out. Then another. Hanson jerked, then crumpled to the ground. Behind him stood Hannah, a smoking shotgun in her weathered hands. "Nobody threatens my people," the old woman said firmly. The remaining attackers, seeing their leaders fallen, quickly surrendered. By the time Sheriff Davis and his posse arrived, the fight was over. 2 Hansons dead, 1 wounded and captured, along with their hired guns. Vaughn suffered only the graze on his arm, which Winifred bandaged with gentle hands after the sheriff had taken their statements and departed with the prisoners. "You could have been killed," she said softly as they sat alone on the porch that evening, the ranch quiet once more. "So could you," he replied, his hand finding hers. "When I saw Hanson aiming at you." He broke off, unable to voice the terror of that moment. "But I wasn't," she reminded him. "We survived, Vaughn. All of us." He looked out over the ranch, her ranch, bathed in the golden light of sunset. The buildings stood solid and secure, the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and beside him sat a woman of remarkable courage. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly. "About what?" "About everything." He turned to face her fully. "About the frontier demanding solitude. About being too rough for love." His hand rose to touch her cheek. "About not deserving a second chance at happiness." Winifred's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Are you saying what I think you're saying, Vaughn Quinn?" "I'm saying I love you," he answered simply, the words feeling both foreign and right on his tongue. "I've been fighting it for weeks, but today showed me the truth. Life out here is uncertain. We could have lost everything today, but the only loss I couldn't bear was losing you." She leaned into his touch, her smile tremulous. "Then don't lose me." "I don't intend to," he murmured, drawing her closer. "If you'll have me, rough edges and all, I want to build a life with you. Here. Together." "Together," she repeated, the word of vow between them. As their lips met in a kiss that promised new beginnings, Vaughn Quinn finally understood what his father had meant. The frontier did take what it wanted, but it also gave in measure beyond imagining to those brave enough to open their hearts to its possibilities. 2 months later, on a crisp October morning, Vaughn Quinn and Winifred Lawrence were married beneath the pines that gave their ranch its name. The entire town of Pinedale turned out for the celebration, curious to witness the union of the mountain cowboy and the eastern schoolteacher who had defied all expectations. Sheriff Davis served as best man, while Hannah stood proudly beside Winifred. Miguel and Tomas had constructed an arch of twisted pine branches under which the couple exchanged their vows. "I never believed in second chances," Vaughn said when it came time to speak his piece, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, "until you taught me that the frontier's greatest gift isn't the freedom of solitude, but the courage to love despite knowing what can be lost." Winifred, radiant in a simple white dress with golden aspen leaves woven into her hair, replied with equal emotion, "You said the West demands everything, but what you didn't say is that it gives back tenfold to those brave enough to risk their hearts." As winter descended on Whispering Pines Ranch, the newly married couple faced the season from the strength of their union. The main house had been expanded, joining Vaughn's cabin logs with Winifred's inherited structure, a physical embodiment of their merged lives. In the evenings, while snow piled against the windows and wind whistled down from the mountains, they would sit before the fire, planning the spring planting, discussing the cattle herd's expansion, or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. On one such night, as Christmas approached, Winifred placed Vaughn's hand gently against her still flat stomach. "Come June," she said softly, "our family will grow by one more." The wonder that spread across his face, this man who had once declared himself too rough for love, was answer enough. Vaughn gathered her close, his cheek pressed against her golden hair, and whispered thanks for the gift of her love and the promise of their future. The following summer, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows of Whispering Pines, Winifred gave birth to a daughter with her mother's golden hair and her father's determined blue eyes. They named her Hope, for what had been restored to them both. And in years to come, when travelers passed through Pinedale, they often heard tell of the thriving ranch in the valley, of the eastern schoolteacher who had tamed not just the wilderness, but the heart of a solitary mountain man who had once believed himself too rough for love.